Today's video we're talking X30 gearbox. Welcome back to the Power Public YouTube channel. Today's video we're going to be running you through the X30 gearbox. Now this is a solid engine. If you haven't driven one, get one. They're so much fun. And to maintain the gearbox, there's a few key things. We've got the filler plug here at the front, and we have the breather tube here at the back. When you're going to replace the fluid, you could probably do it on the Kart, but it's best to take it off because the fill point is actually above the oil line. So you'd have to tip the engine sort of forwards to try to get all the oil out. Now in today's video, we're going to be showing you how to remove the ignition and the rotor, and also too, we're going to be pulling off the cover and showing you what it looks like inside the gearbox. So let's get to it. First up, we're going to drain the oil by removing the sump plug. To do that, you're going to need a 14mm socket and a ratchet. So first up, I'm going to rock the engine back so the oil doesn't all spill out. And with my 14mm socket, just going to crack that off. And then we can remove the sump plug. Now with a suitable container, you can just lift the engine up and tip the oil out of the sump plug. So you can see here that it's supposed to have 30 milliliters of oil. This is probably a little bit underdone, but it's in good condition. So the oil was in there, but not that much. Next up, we're going to remove the ignition stator. So with your 4mm Allen key, you can just undo these 4 cap screws. Now with the screws removed, you can simply slide the stator off the engine. The next step is to remove the ignition rotor. And to do that, you'll need a 17mm socket and a rattle gun. So to undo this nut, it's a 17mm right hand thread. And you should be able to hold the crankshaft just with your fingers. They're not that super duper tight. And this guy slides straight off. So you can see here the little keyway for the location, and it slides onto the crankshaft, and it's got the key, which is what they call a dovetail, already machined into the crankshaft. So you can't get it wrong. So it only has one ignition setting. So the next step, we're going to remove the gearbox cover. And to do that, you're going to need a 5mm Allen key on your impact wrench. So to remove the gearbox cover, we're just going to remove the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 screws that hold the gearbox cover onto the crankcase, and the 2 screws that hold the starter motor support bracket here. Careful when you're removing your starter motor support bracket, because there's a special little washer that goes on here in between the bottom bracket and the gearbox cover. So while we've gone this far, I'm going to show you how to remove the starter motor as well. Now to remove the starter motor, you're going to need to loosen off and remove the cap screw that's down in here. There's one here, the second one's here, and the third one's on the other side. So now, using a screwdriver, we're going to be able to get the starter motor out of the engine. And to do that, we're going to insert the screwdriver here lightly and just gently lever it out of position. Now, there is a little O-ring in there that'll hold it in. So you probably can't see it, but the third screw that lives down in here, if you don't remove it, will get jammed when you're trying to get the starter motor to leave the engine. So you can do one of two things. You can sit the engine up like this, and that will hold the screw in its right orientation, and it'll come out with the starter motor. So you can actually put it in with the starter motor as well. Otherwise, you've got to try to remove the screw through its little house before you move the starter motor out of the engine. Now we're ready to remove the gearbox cover. So the gearbox cover is held to the crank case with a couple of dowel pins. So if you can just lightly tap with a soft hammer, the gearbox cover comes off pretty easy. Just like that. This little guy here is only really kept on with this O-ring, and it's sandwiched between the balance gear on the crankshaft and the oil seal of the gearbox housing. Now, as you can see, the gears are clearly marked. Now, there's three important markings. The first one here you can see is on the balance gear and the balance gear shaft. And there's two lines and they need to be at the 12 o'clock position. The second important marks is the timing of the two gears together, and that's right here, and they should line up perfectly. And the third marks are right here at the 12 o'clock as well, and this is the crankshaft and the crankshaft balance gear, and this is with the piston at top dead center. Okay, so now that we've inspected our gearbox, the gears are in good condition, the circlip is in good condition, everything's pretty clean. It's time to clean up the gearbox cover and put it all back together. First up, we're going to reinsert the O-ring onto the crankshaft and the little sleeve. So next up, we're going to put on the gearbox cover, and you can see here is the two dowel pins there for the location of the gearbox cover. So we're going to just lightly get the seal on there, and with the gearbox cover, just give it a little sort of rock forwards and backwards, and it'll slip down on the dowel pins. And now you can reinstall the cap screws to hold the cover on. So now you can double check the screws with your torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters. So now we're going to reinstall the starter motor. So as you're inserting the starter motor, make sure that this O-ring is in the gearbox housing, because it's really hard to get it in, if not impossible later on. And then you can just push that in there like that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is replace the rotor onto the crankshaft. So as you can see here, there's a flat washer and a spring washer, then the rotor, and we're going to line the keyway up that's cut into the rotor to the keyway on the crankshaft. And you just put them on there and slide it straight on. Reinstall the 17mm hex nut, and with the rattle gun set on half strength, you can do the nut back up. So the next thing we're going to do is reinstall the 4 screws and the stator to the gearbox cover, and also to the bottom mount for the starter motor bracket. So like we said earlier, there's no adjustment on the X30 ignition. Just put the selector to the top, the cable to the bottom, with the IAME symbol here to the outside, and you can just reinstall these 4 screws and your timing's all set. So now we're ready to reinstall the starter motor bracket. Don't forget to reinstall your little washers, otherwise you'll overstress this housing. So this is the IAME gearbox oil as supplied with the X30. It's the world oil, gear oil, and you're going to need 30 millilitres. So you could just guess how much gearbox oil to put into the engine. Otherwise you can get yourself a little beaker like this and measure it out. While you're filling up the engine with oil, sometimes if you don't have a little bit of hose on here, the oil will leak out the breather. This is the breather for the gearbox. So a good idea is just to block that off with your thumb. If you do overfill the gearbox with too much oil, it'll just blow out through the breather hole. So tilt the engine back with the sump removed, and we're just going to pour the oil in gently, with trying not to spill too much of it all over the engine. So wipe up any spillage. Now you can reinstall the sump plug by hand. Just get that started, like so. Nip that up. Tip the engine forwards and do the bolt up tight with your 3/8 drive ratchet and 14mm socket. The X30 is a fantastic engine. It's super fun. I highly recommend it for anyone that likes go-kart racing. And if you look after it, it's going to serve you well. So changing the gearbox oil on the regular is definitely up there in your maintenance schedule. If you want an in-depth maintenance schedule, by the way, you can go to our website www.powerpublic.com.au and check out our Racing Rituals tutorial series, where we get in-depth on kart maintenance and how to drive like a pro. If you're liking these videos, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button, and turning on those notifications. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Power Public. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.